தொடங்கலாம்.
Vanakkam and good evening all. On behalf of Puratchikkavignar, Bharathidasan Tamil Mandram, I wish all the wonderful women around the world a very happy Women's Day. I'm Daisy Jeyaprakash, who is moderating today's event. இன்றைய நிகழ்ச்சியை பாரதியின் மாதர் தம்மை இழிவு செய்யும் மடமையை கொடுத்துவோம் என்ற வரிகளோடு தொடங்கலாம் என்று எண்ணுகின்றேன். As we know, the International Women's Day is celebrated annually on March 8th to recognize the achievements of women, promote gender equality, and support empowerment of women. This year, Women's Day will be observed under the theme Acceleration Action. This emphasizes the need for urgent action towards the gender equality. The origin of International Women's Day dates back to the labor movement of the early 20th century. It was sparked by protests against the poor working conditions that arose during industrialization. In 1908, 15,000 women marched in New York City demanding their rights, and Clara Judson proposed an international dedicated to women in 1910. Following this, the first Women's Day was observed in many centuries, many countries in 1911. In 1917, the Russian women's strike led to the official recognition of March 8th as an official date. UN formally recognized the International Women's Day in 1975, further cementing its importance. International Women's Day is seen as a day to address gender inequalities beyond a traditional celebration. In heights economic inequality, political underrepresentation, and gender-biased violence against women, while fostering global solidarity for women's empowerment. The day continues to emphasize laws and social changes that shape women's rights. Over the past year, women in countries such as Afghanistan, Iran, Ukraine, India, and US have fought for the rights amid war, violence, policy changes in their respective countries. Today, we are having two wonderful guests, former Canadian politician, Member of Parliament, Rathika Sitsabaiesan, and Chithra Jeyaram. Please join us. Welcome Chithra Jeyaram, independent filmmaker and educator. Chithra Jeyaram is a physical therapist turned filmmaker with a master in finance in film from University of Texas, Austin. Her work prioritizes subverting stereotypes by framing narratives that highlight perspectives, struggles, and intricacies that are left out. In her film, Rags to Pads dismantles stigmas around menstruation, and Foreign Puzzle explores motherhood through cancer. Her upcoming film, Our Daughters, examine open adoption through an immigrant lens. She has also produced Amma's Pride, a powerful film about a supportive mother and her daughter's fight to legalize her marriage. In addition to directing and producing, she edits as well. She's the adjunct faculty at NYU. I will turn it over to Chithra Jeyaram. The stage is yours, Chithra Jeyaram.
நன்றி டேசி. வணக்கம். அண்ட் தமிழ்ல பேசணுமா இல்ல இங்கிலீஷ்ல பேசலாமா இல்ல
உங்க சாய்ஸ்ங்க, எதுலனாலும் பேசலாம்.
ஓகே. வணக்கம். என்ன இதுக்கு ஐ மீன் தேங்க்யூ ஃபார் இன்வைட்டிங் மீ டு ஜாயின் திஸ் கேதரிங். அண்ட் I always in மாதிரி இந்த commemorative months, commemorative days always are very contemplative spaces, right? நான் பிறந்தது வந்து தூத்துக்குடியில. And in a very big family. Inga amma was one of 8 children, and so I had a lot of cousins. And summer holidays kalam party oda gramathukku povom. And few words that I'd never liked was பண்ணாதே, பொண்ணா இருந்தா இது பண்ணாதே, இல்ல பொண்ணா இருந்தா இது பண்ண முடியாது. Like this was all these two words were always words that activated me, and things that I always felt the need to push against. The moment இது பண்ண முடியாது, பண்ணக்கூடாதுன்னு சொன்னாங்கன்னா அது பண்ணியே ஆகணுங்கிற ஒரு சின்ன வயசுல இருந்தே that was always there. Always seeing என்னோட boundaries என்ன, எது வரைக்கும் like, and I want to keep expanding. என்ன பண்ணலாம், பண்ண முடியாது, and ஏன் பண்ண முடியாது, ஏன் பண்ணக்கூடாது. அது இந்த வயசுன்னு இல்லை, எனக்கு விவரம் தெரிஞ்ச டைம்ல இருந்தே அது அந்த மாதிரி தான். I also was very lucky to have a father who was naturally not gendered. ஸோ எனக்கும் என் தங்கச்சிக்கும் தம்பிக்கும் வித்தியாசம் கிடையாது. எங்களை 3 பேருமே வாடா போடான்னு தான் சொல்லுவாரு. எதுவா இருந்தாலும் அட் ஹோம் அப்பா 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 பார்வையில நாங்க 3 பேரும் ஒண்ணுதான். நாங்க 3 பேரும் என்ன வேணாலும் பண்ணிக்கலாம். ஸோ வீட்ல வந்துட்டு எனக்கு ஒரு there was a level of freedom and expectation, and வெளி உலகத்துக்கு போறப்போ அது கிடையாது. So constantly there was this battle between what I was allowed. When I say home, just my father and mother, not even extended family. And தூத்துக்குடியில இருந்து அந்த ஒரு அந்த ஊர்ல இருந்து every migration எந்தெந்த ஊருக்கு போறப்போ it was always constantly different forms of experiencing that. So, and then part of I started out as a physical therapist, and I also noticed that a lot of professions women join are professions of caregiving, which is also why a lot of nurses or physical therapists or the teachers, professions where it's an extension of this big burden of motherhood, right? Like motherhood is embraced, but it is also I have a friend, எனக்கு ஒரு friend இருக்காங்க ப்ரொடியூசரா இருக்கிறப்போ, she's one of the few producers. அவங்க சொல்லுவாங்க, when a male producer goes into a set, there is not this expectation of mothering from the male producer, but when a female producer goes into the set, there is அரைவணைப்பு, பாசம், அதெல்லாம் எதிர்பார்க்கறாங்க. And she'll be like, செட்டுக்கு போனதும் first thing she'll say is, நான் உங்க அம்மா கிடையாது. And then she'll start, because the burden of motherhood is there, right? So part of when I got into filmmaking, it was the first profession where that I was in where women were a minority, a significant minority. And also, if you're a woman of color in the United States, it has its own set of barriers. Plus, things that I was naturally doing, பண்ணாதே முடியாதுங்கிறதெல்லாம் இங்க வந்துட்டு it started taking a different meaning, and even broader needs for assertiveness. For example, நான் காலேஜ்ல இருக்கிறப்போ in the like I realized most of my white professors had no idea what this lived experience was. What does it mean to come from displaced families? இதெல்லாம் நம்ம and அவங்களுக்கு புரிஞ்சாதான் நமக்கு ஆக்சஸ் உண்டு நம்ம பண்றதுக்கு. So I realized right from the beginning, when filmmakingல I have to make a film which works, but I also have to constantly keep creating a pathway and make sure that weeds don't form in that pathway so somebody else can follow, because that pathway didn't exist. And it continues to be the case in very specific terms. So when I came to film, I saw this as two, like it was unlike physical therapy, which I came into. Physical therapy la na enna pandradhu, in many ways it was a profession that was not gendered. There were men and women, they were doing the same kind of things, at least in the US. So when I came to filmmaking, the gendered expectations was significant. What does that mean by that, right? Like, so the kind of stories you were allowed to tell or you were expected to tell were narrower. And then if you were in the US, if you are a woman of color, or as if like when the Foreign Puzzle, the film about breast cancer, features a Mexican American woman. So I cannot tell you the number of funding organizations that I have had conversations with, where casually they'll be like, did you not find a brown woman to tell the story with? As if I'm incapable of connecting with a Mexican American woman or any other woman to tell the story. And these are not questions someone will ask a white director or a man, that whether they can tell a story of someone else. So நான் என்ன கதை சொல்லலாங்கிறதுக்கு நிறைய பேரியர்ஸ் உண்டு. அப்புறம் expectation, right? So நம்ம போனதும் they see our face. The expectation is சவுத் ஏஷியன் ஸ்டோரியோ இல்ல அந்த கதைகள் தான் பண்ணுவேன். ஸோ ஒரு 1 or 2 years நான் வந்து இன்டென்ஷனலா சவுத் ஏஷியன் கதைகள் பண்ணல. Not because I don't have South Asian stories, not because I'm not interested in telling our stories, but because I didn't want to be pigeonholed as I'm capable of doing just this. So initially, first 1 or 2 years, I was intentionally not making these stories, and being expansive about what I'm saying, so that there is more of a cross-cultural intersectional lens. The other thing that I realized was, they say, we want a seat at the table. I actually realized we need to set the table, because the table itself was problematic sometimes. The table was not made for the kind of things we want to do. What do I mean by that? The distribution, like padam, in the film world, or or any artist in the US, you can broadly say, or in the Western world, and I think to some extent India la kuda panna sollala idha patti. India நம்ம ஒரு இந்த மாதிரி படங்கள் தான் பண்ணலாம், இந்த மாதிரி படம் பண்ணீங்கன்னா இந்த மாதிரி பிளாட்ஃபார்ம்ல போடலாம், இல்ல யூடியூப்ல போடுங்க. லைக் there is this assumption that people are only going to watch a certain kind of things, or there are gatekeepers. இவங்க இப்படி பண்ணினாதான் நாங்க எடுத்துப்போம் அப்படின்னு they start telling me things. What I realize is there is no such thing, that taste is cultivated. That means, what people want to see, what people want to engage with, அதெல்லாம் வந்து just as we learn to eat new foods, listen to new music, we learn and engage with all kinds of content. So part of, at least in the last 4-5 years, the things I've been particularly interested in is learning to narrow my focus. So like Daisy sonna madri, I try to limit the stories I'm telling instead in within the 4 walls of a home. ஏன்னா குடும்பம் நம்ம வீட்ல குடும்பம் ஒரு 4 சுவர்த்துக்குள்ள அப்பா அம்மா குழந்தைகள், அந்த குடும்பத்துல என்ன நடக்குது, அந்த குடும்பத்துல டிஸ்ரப்ஷன் வந்துச்சுன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்களேன், ஒரு வார்னாலேயோ இல்ல அவங்க அவங்க வீட்டுல யாருக்கோ உடம்பு சரியில்லை அதனால பிரச்சனைகள் வரலாம். எனி டிஸ்ரப்ஷன் தட் ஹேப்பன்ஸ் வித் ஃபேமிலி, அதை அவங்க எப்படி அந்த டிஸ்ரப்ஷனை எப்படி ரெஸ்பாண்ட் பண்றாங்க. ஏன்னா what happens within the 4 walls of the house affects how we live, how we think, what we do. The personal is political. So once that was, I decided that was going to be my focus. But also in the process of looking at the focus area, particularly women's roles within that home, I wanted to sort of expand what that could be. So in Amma's Pride, when we found in Thoothukudi this Amma who had no problem to be super expansive in accepting her trans daughter. She didn't need to go to anybody. She didn't need to understand anything. என் குழந்தை எப்படி இருந்தாலும் என் குழந்தை தான். அது அவங்க என்ன வேணும், என்ன பண்ணணும்னு நினைச்சாலும் அதை நான் புரிஞ்சுக்கிறேன். And so this expansive motherhood felt like something that was worthy of glorifying. Or இப்போ நான் பண்ற படத்துல வந்துட்டு, இப்போ ஒரு அடாப்ஷன் படத்துல intersectionality பார்க்கிறேன், where there are 2 mothers in the story. One is a mother who gave birth and was not in a place to care for her children. அவங்க அந்த குழந்தைய தத்து கொடுத்திருக்காங்க. அந்த தத்து எடுத்த அம்மா வந்து she initially was unable to have children, but she comes to a place of gratitude இந்த அம்மா குழந்தை கொடுத்ததுனால. And so ஒரு அந்த அவங்க கதையை வந்து ஒரு 6 வருஷமா எடுத்தேன். ஏன்னா I was fascinated by the friendship that these two moms had, because typically என்ன மாதிரி கதைகள் வரும்னா, ஒருத்தங்களுக்கு குழந்தை பிறக்க முடியாம ஒரு குழந்தை வந்தாங்கன்னா ஒரு பொசசிவ்னஸ் இருக்கும், ஒரு இன்செக்யூரிட்டி இருக்கும். அவங்களுக்கு அந்த இன்னொரு அம்மாவை வந்து அவங்க வாழ்க்கையில சேர்த்துக்கொள்ள முடியாது. as if அன்பு வந்து ஒரு லிமிட்டெட் கெப்பாசிட்டி மாதிரி. 2 அம்மாவுக்கும் குழந்தைகளுக்கு லவ் பண்ண முடியாது, இல்ல 2 அம்மாங்களுக்கும் லைக் இவங்க as if நம்ம மனசுல வந்து லவ் இப்படிதான் ஒருத்தவங்களுக்கு கொடுத்துட்டோம்னா இன்னொருத்தவங்களுக்கு இடம் இல்லாத மாதிரி இருக்க கூடாதுல்ல. சோ இந்த இவங்க கதையில வந்துட்டு I noticed these two women finding that capacity to do that, and I felt the need to share that story. So always இந்த கதையில பார்த்தாலும் இந்த மாதிரி ஏதாவது இருந்துச்சுன்னா I'm interested in stories where people are seeing possibilities. ஊர் ஃபுல்லா நிறைய பிரச்சனைகள் இருக்கு, அந்த பிரச்சனைகள் நியூஸ்ல காமிக்கிறாங்க, அதையும் திருப்பி நம்ம படத்துலயும் காமிக்கணும். அந்த பிரச்சனைகள்ல வந்து இன்னொரு ஸ்டெப் எடுத்து அதுல வந்து ஒரு நம்ம மத்தியத்துல இருக்கிற சராசரி மனிதர்கள் சிட்டிசன்ஸ் அதை வந்து என்ன மாதிரி புஷ் பண்ணி என்ன பண்றாங்க, ஒரு 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 ப்ராப்ளம பார்த்தாங்கன்னா அவங்க எப்படி ஃபேஸ் பண்றாங்க, அது வந்து ஒரு உதாரணமா நம்ம வந்து மக்களுக்கு காமிக்கலாமே. அந்த நோக்கத்தோட தான் எந்த படமா இருந்தாலும் அதுல இறங்குறது. ஃபார் இன்ஸ்டன்ஸ் I'm editing a film in New York City. We finished editing it. செக்ஸ் ஒர்க்கர்ஸை பத்தி. ஸோ நியூயார்க்ல வந்துட்டு there is significant work going on to decriminalize sex work. செக்ஸ் ஒர்க்கை வந்து ஒரு லேபர் ரைட்ஸ், looking at it as access to work, and the need for dignity and protection of labor. அந்த ஆங்கிள் இருந்து அந்த படம் அந்த டைரக்டர் பண்றாங்க. And that was so that kind of like again looking at sex workers, their families, and what they need, and why are they doing what they're doing, why are people choosing to do sex work. That became the focus, right? Now where I am is I'm adding, I like I said, part of it is paving the path. Second, this year, next year, and hopefully in the years to come, the focus is also thinking about audience, the people for whom the films are being made, right? அவங்க so இப்போ இந்த வருஷம் வந்துட்டு we are thinking of using data and how people interact. கதைகள் எப்படி நம்ம மக்களுக்கு கொண்டு போய் சேர்க்கிறது, right? இது if the film is not on Netflix, and I'm not talking about my film, in a given calendar year in the United States, at least 20 to 30,000 films are being made. அதுல நான் வந்து I can say that there are good 2,000 films that we all should be watching. But we really get to in the top 100, 200 films that will get a lot of attention, and really the top 15, 20 is what everybody gets to see. So how do we get some of these really, these gems that are made by people that probably don't have the money to push, to push the marketing that is necessary, right? So this 2 years I'm doing sort of like a pilot study to see how can people with low budgets cultivate the audience and how to connect with people. Second is mentoring, right? Second thing that's important is like what I didn't have when I was a student filmmaker, what I didn't have in the few years that I ended up making so many mistakes and learning from my mistakes, is paying it forward. So part of the work is making sure every year that I'm having 1 or 2 student filmmakers or topics that I care about. Like last year, for instance, Palestine struggle was really important for me. And so I was mentoring a filmmaker that was making content for Al Jazeera. And then in the version that I'm mentoring a student who has access to a story that is very personal. And, in shaping these stories, I feel like I am helping people know about these issues from a perspective that is usually not available to us. And then in teaching, helping people, one of the big things I'm interested as a teacher is, at the end of my semester, if students go out understanding what is their artistic vision, because it took me 5 years to understand that I am interested in telling stories about the family. What if that becomes an active process right from the beginning? நமக்கு என்ன கதைகள் என்ன பண்ணணும்னு நம்ம கொஞ்சம் ஃபோக்கஸோட பார்த்தோம்னா அது எப்படி இருக்குங்கிறது. And then finally, I think, expanding women's issue outside women's perspective. And then that was like Daisy was saying, Rags to Pattern or first ஒரு படம் பண்ணினேன் when I was still in college, I think. அப்போ வந்துட்டு என்னோட காலேஜ் தீசிஸ் படம் வந்துட்டு won an award in a university in UK, and they gave me a little bit of money to make my next film. அந்த படம் பண்றப்போ they told me, make a film in your country. I went from the United States. I went on a US passport. So I assumed they said, okay, I'm going to make something over here. So I pitched an idea. Appo vandu and varsham it was second Obama president. No, it was leading up to the second election for, I think, 2012 election. And in Virginia, which appo when I was living in the DMV area, Virginia la vandu, if you were black and if you were 1 in 5 black men were incarcerated, and if you had small possessions of marijuana, it is a felony charge and you spend really long time in the prison. But when you come out, you don't have your right to vote, and you're disenfranchised, and the only way you can vote is for the governor to pardon you. So I wanted to follow 2 people going through ஒரு 6 மாசம் எடுக்கும் அந்த application fill பண்றதுக்கு, and then the governor may choose to pardon them, and I wanted to see are they going to vote for Obama for that election. When I pitched this idea to this organization in UK, they came back to me and they said, well, we wanted you to make a film from your country. And I was like, yes, I am, basically they wanted me to make something from India. And we went back and forth and they were like, United States does not have developmental problems. Like, what do you mean it does not have developmental problems? I'm telling you that in Virginia, 1 in 5 black men don't have the right to vote, and right to vote is fundamental in having someone come back. So long story short, we went back and forth, and eventually they said that their mandate, அவங்க ஃபண்டிங் மேண்டேட் வந்து UNDP கோல்ஸ்க்கு தான் யூஸ் பண்ண முடியும், and United States does not fall under the purview. So again, as I said, right, I'm always at these crossroads of என்னென்ன பண்ண முடியாது பண்ணக்கூடாதுன்னு சொல்ற இதுல. So it was, I either could refuse saying I can only make this US story, or I could take the funding. And then I started telling them, hey, the money you're giving is less than an air ticket to India from the United States. If I was making this film in Virginia, the money would go far. And so they wouldn't budge in anything. So I took the money, which would only pay for an air ticket. So I set limitations. I can only film something. I told them I'm only going to make a 3-minute film. And I told them that whatever I'm picking in India, you cannot have any more say in it. And I found, there was this gentleman, Arunachalam Muruganandam, who had tried on a sanitary pad and was making these sanitary napkins. And I just went to him and I told him I want to make a film, but I want to make a film, but that's only 3 minutes long. And he was like, it takes me 17 minutes to tell my story. What do you mean you're going to tell my story in 3 minutes? And so he gave me permission, because at this time he was doing TED Talks and he was doing all these major things. And he was fascinated that I was willing to do it in such a short form. And I asked him for 1 hour of his time. And then I asked him to connect me with somebody in a village in Tamil Nadu who has economic sustainability. அவங்க கிட்ட இருந்து அந்த சானிட்டரி பேட் எப்படி மேக் பண்ணுவாங்க, அந்த மேனுஃபேக்சரிங் கத்துக்கிட்டு இண்டிபெண்டா இருக்கிற ஒரு பெண் வந்து எனக்கு கனெக்ட் பண்ணி விடுங்கன்னு சொன்னேன். அந்த 3 நிமிஷம் படத்துல இவருக்கு வந்து பாதி டைமும் அந்த அம்மாக்கு பாதி டைமும் கொடுத்தேன். Because that was like, I wanted to have him in because I don't want, like, ஒரு moment ஒரு issue women's issue சொன்னோம்னு வச்சுக்கோங்களேன், அது somehow it becomes பாதி 50% of us only care for. The moment we think of it as a societal issue, all of us have to care for it. We all have to contribute. Only then it changes. And so it was important to have him in there. But I wanted to also see how, this was, in some ways, it was decentralized, that the moment someone else got, and I found this lady, அவங்க அந்த sanitary, அவங்க 5 friends சேர்ந்து ஒரு சின்ன ஷெட் எடுத்திருந்தாங்க திருப்பூர் வெளியில. அந்த ஷெட்ல வந்துட்டு அவங்க 5 பேரு, அவங்க எல்லாரும், all of them had children. So அவங்க ஷிஃப்ட் மாதிரி எடுத்துட்டு, that was, they were able to run it 2 shifts, each of them taking turns. And what they got, they also were very smart. அவங்க என்ன நினைச்சாங்க, சரி நம்ம பண்ணி நம்ம சுத்தி இருக்கிற கிராமங்களுக்கு கொடுக்கணும்னா அங்க சுத்தி இருக்கிறவங்களை எஜுகேட் பண்ணணும்ட்டு. So these women were going village to village, teaching other people how to use it, and then selling this and creating a sustainable economy around it. So that was the film I ended up making for that. And I want to sort of close this talk with that, because I find that with every film I make, I meet such wonderful people. I meet people who are finding ways to again, the same thing I started with, right? Pannade mudiyade, like Arunachalam Muruganandam kitta, they said you can't make a low-cost sanitary napkin. He made a low-cost sanitary napkin. He taught a whole bunch of women how to then make it themselves. But also in the process of these women trying to make it sustainable, they were figuring out how to do this, right? So I think possibility, and thinking of always there has to be a way, and it is possible, and therefore we can. And with that, I would like to sort of end my talk. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. ரொம்ப இயல்பா சிறப்பா பேசுனீங்க. ஒரு பெண்ணா நீங்க எதிர்கொண்ட எல்லாத்தையும் ரொம்ப சிறப்பா கூறினீங்க. சமூகத்தோட எல்லா மக்களையும், விளிம்புநிலை மக்களையும் உங்க படத்துல கொண்டு வர்ற இத பத்தி சொன்னீங்க. பர்டிகுலர்லி இந்த நாப்கின் பிரச்சனையை பத்தி சொல்றது, அத உங்க படத்துல பேசுனது பத்தி நீங்க சொன்னது ரொம்ப சிறப்பா இருந்துச்சு. ரொம்ப நன்றி. It's really we are really happy to have you with your fun-loving speech. Thank you so much again. Let's welcome our honorable guest, Thirumigu Rathika Sitsabaiesan, former Canadian politician and member of parliament. Rathika Sitsabaiesan was born in Jaffna, Sri Lanka. She attended University Toronto and Carleton University. She has served in various roles in New Democratic Party, including campaign manager and been as advisor to NDP leader Jack Layton on Tamil issues. Sitsabaiesan won 2011 Canadian federal election after securing 8,935 votes, which is 41%. Sitsabaiesan became the first Tamil Canadian to be elected to the House of Commons of Canada. Sitsabaiesan is a recipient of V.K. Krishnan Menon Institute, the Institute's Personality of the Year Award in 2012. The award was conferred on her for her untiring efforts on human rights issues in Sri Lanka, opposing the persecution of Tamil minorities in Sri Lanka. She says that her focus is people being treated with fairness, equality, dignity, with justice. I'll turn it over to Rathika Sitsabaiesan. The stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Daisy. I appreciate it. Good evening, everybody. Vanakkam. Happy International Women's Day 2025. And I just want to, before I get started, acknowledge that I am in Orangeville, Ontario in Canada, which is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, who are the Iroquois people, the Ojibwe, Chippewa peoples, and the Potawatomi and Odawa of the Three Fires Confederacy. This territory here is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and the Haldimand Treaty, and it is unceded Indigenous territory that I occupy today. As I get started, I would like to socially locate myself a little bit. You know, I'm here before you as a Tamil woman, as a survivor, a daughter of survivors, a sister, a mother raising the next generation in a world that still demands that we fight for justice. As Daisy mentioned, I'm a barrier-breaking former politician, a recovering politician, a professor shaping young minds and sometimes older minds, and a mompreneur balancing the demands of a small business and single motherhood. And like many Tamil women, I come from a history marked by resilience, by struggle, and by the necessity to fight for our space, whether it's in politics, in business, in the classroom, or in community. It's always that need to create my space and fight for the space that I occupy, because the chair was never pulled up for me at any table. I had to either take my own chair to the table or create my own table and sit around it myself with like-minded individuals. My story is deeply tied to the ongoing pain, I must say, of Tamil mothers who in Ulam who are still searching for their missing and or murdered sons and husbands, to the weight of intergenerational trauma that has been passed on to me. And I do my best to interrupt that passage of the trauma to my daughter, and the responsibility that I know that I carry forward, our collective fight for justice as Tamil women. I recognize the many privileges that I have, and I'm very grateful for those blessings, like education, for example, the fact that I get to be a survivor and I get to live in Canada and have so many privileges. And so this year's theme for International Women's Day is accelerate action. So for me, that's moving beyond discussion and conversations and to making tangible change. Why that theme really resonates with me is that I've always been a person of action, because like I said, there weren't many pathways that were clearly laid out for me, and I needed to always blaze my own trail throughout my life. As a child of war and an immigrant starting school in Canada for the first time without ever knowing the school environment and not having a strong grasp of either of the official languages here in this country, I knew that I had to figure out my own path. And this was only going to happen for me by jumping into action and advocating for myself. And eventually I knew that I had built in me the capacity to be able to advocate for others. And I knew that I had to advocate for the underrepresented voices, those who had been pushed into the margins of society. So very early on, I became an advocate for youth inclusion, women's rights, labor rights, immigrant advocacy and inclusion at all tables. So I know on the poster it said I was going to talk about politics. So let me talk a little bit about my political foray. For me, it really started with community development and advocacy, because that started for me when I was 7 years old. Some of you are probably like, what, 7 years old? Yeah, because when we came to Canada, I didn't know Tamil, because I had only learned Tamil here and there, whatever we spoke in the home. I had never been to school. So Tamil was very important, and our Tamil identity and holding on to that was very important for my parents. And so they found Tamil school in Mississauga, the community where I grew up in. And we didn't have a car, so we had to take 3 buses every Saturday morning to get to where the Tamil school was happening, because there was only one location in all of Mississauga. And at first I thought it was fun and exciting because I had never been on these giant buses, or maybe I was, and I don't know. It was an experience. It was an expedition, so it was fun for me. But then very quickly, every Saturday morning, having to wake up early, take 3 buses and get to Tamil school when I knew that all my other friends were either sleeping in or hanging out, having fun, playing, it became quite exhausting, and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to go to Tamil school anymore. So I had a problem. my pain point was that I didn't want to do this. So I had a conversation with my parents about it. Really, it was my father, and said, I don't want to do this anymore. If Tamil school and is so important for you, then you need to make it easier for me, because I'm not doing this 3 buses every Saturday morning business. And so that was really my first exposure into community advocacy work, because what we did was we reached out to the local school board trustees and said, hey, can we please start another Tamil school that's maybe in this neighborhood, because Mississauga is a huge community. And we faced many no's, where the Tamil community was such a tiny community in Mississauga back then. And they're like, no, we don't need another one. And we kept on knocking on doors and finding people in positions of power who kept on saying no, until we found one person who was willing to take a chance and said, all right, if you folks do the work, sign up 25 people, I will find a school in a different neighborhood than the neighborhood that is there. So that's what we did. 7-year-old with daddy in tow, made flyers and went knocking on doors of where we thought Tamil people lived in our neighborhood, in the broader neighborhood. And we signed up 25 people. And that advocacy, from the pain point of that 7-year-old, we were able to start Tamil school with the Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board as part of their heritage language program. And that starting of Tamil over many decades grew to seeing Tamil as one of the heritage language offerings at 10 different schools with 10 different classes in each location. And it was a thriving language as part of the school board and the program that they were offering. And for me, I learned through that the importance of building relationships and truly spending time with people to learn their pain points. I knew my pain point as a 7-year-old, and we were able to find a solution for that. And in the decades to come afterward, I don't know the numbers, but I'm going to take a guess and say tens of thousands of Tamil children have gone through that program. And many communities, many Tamil families have been able to hold on to their Tamil identity. In grade 6, I started volunteering at a nursing home and realized that loneliness was killing a lot of our seniors and was really killing them. And so I orchestrated that a group of us, grade 6 and 7 and middle schoolers, would go to the nursing home on a weekly visit. And it really changed the energy and spirit of the seniors at the nursing home. So the reason I say all this is because I didn't go into politics, into federal politics, because I wanted to be a politician. For me, my political journey really started in student politics because I was making those changes happen in middle school and then in high school, finding out what needed to happen or change for our community. And then in university is when I really ran at that point, I thought it was a large scale election experience. With, a university population of about 20,000 people. And somewhere along the road, all of these actions were being noticed by the federal political party in Canada here, by the federal NDP. And while I was a student in my undergrad, I got a phone call one year saying, hi, we've noticed you and would love for you to run in Scarborough as our NDP candidate in the next federal election. And I was like, what? Me? I was 22 at the time, still an undergraduate student living in Ottawa, which was, the nation's capital, 6 hours away from Scarborough. And I didn't know what was going on. I was like, no, I'm not ready to be a federal candidate. I can't, because I knew in my head, growing up, watching the news every night with my dad, that if you were to be a politician, like the people I see on the TV, you had to be an old white man who comes from wealth and was either a doctor or a lawyer. I was a young woman of color growing up in poverty and maybe was going to be a doctor or a lawyer. My mom wanted me to be a doctor and my dad wanted me to be a lawyer. So I had maybe that going on. The only thing I knew for sure is that someday I'd be old. So I figured old was probably 40. I mean, now I don't think 40 is that old. But at that young age, I thought maybe when I was 40, I could run for politics and make change happen at that point. But when they asked me that was in 2003 or 4, I was like, no, I can't run. And then again, I was asked again in the 2008 election this is where in your introduction, Daisy, you had mentioned that I had been a campaign manager for an NDP campaign. I was working as a campaign manager. And then the party came to me and said, you need to be a candidate. Pick a riding, any riding, and go be a candidate. We'll support you. And I was like, no, I'm not ready to be a candidate. I'm here to support other people. And then in leading up to the 2011 federal election, it was really in 2009, I had finished my master's at this point, and after working for the provincial labor board, I had found myself gainfully unemployed because I'm always rocking the boat no matter where I go, because when I see inequities, injustices, I can't just not do anything. And so I shook the boat at the labor board and found myself, kicked to the curb because, well, not really kicked to the curb, but I found my contract not renewed because the white man that was in charge felt like I was maybe challenging his authority, or maybe that I was going for his job even. I don't know what was going on. I never had the opportunity to ask him, but I wasn't at the labor board anymore. And I was working on employment insurance reform in Canada, working with the labor movement and working to change how employment insurance is calculated, how it's run in Canada. And Ryerson University at the time was running a panel similar to a panel like this, I guess, and invited me to speak at that panel. And in the audience that day were 2 members from the candidate search committee for Scarborough Rouge River for the next federal election, whenever that was going to happen. They reached out to me and said, hey, would you ever consider running? And have you ever thought of politics? And I was like, oh, yeah, of course. Politics. Yes. When I'm older. Because at this time, I'm only 27. I have a long way to go to get to 40, right? To get to old. So I thought that I couldn't do this. And I self-selected out, as many women do when you're called to positions of leadership or positions of leadership, or to take a chance. Many women have traditionally and conditioned to self-select out. Like Chithra had mentioned, people saying this, you can't do this, you can't do that. These are areas where as a woman, as a girl, you can't do. And societal conditioning told me that I couldn't. I wasn't ready. I'm not old enough. Because remember, you have to be an old white man, wealth, doctor or lawyer. I wasn't old enough. And I definitely wasn't going to be a doctor or lawyer at that point. I decided that for myself. Something shifted in me when Jack Layton, the former leader of the NDP, reached out one day and said, I've been trying to have conversations with you, and I've been really trying to get you to join our team, and I would love for you to join us. And he offered mentorship. He offered a willingness to have conversation, and he offered mentorship, where I felt like maybe I wasn't going to be alone in this. And having those champions along the way are critically important for all of us, whether you're women or not. Having champions are critically important. And having that conversation with Jack was, I guess, the tipping point for me in deciding that I would run. I had been having about a month-long conversation with that candidate search committee in 2009 as to whether I wanted to do this or not. In 2011, though, when we did run that campaign, my campaign started in 2009, before the election was even called, because for me, I'm that community activist. So I was very embedded in the local community. I knew my neighbors. I got to really know the neighbors and the communities and the people and what was important for them. And it was important for me that if I was going to even put my name forward to be a representative of the people, I needed to really be one of the people in that community and understand the community. So I worked in local community development campaigns. That community had seen so many ups and downs and was actually had one of the lowest voter turnouts in the previous election, second lowest in the entire province of Ontario. And I said, this wasn't going to happen. Not on my watch. So we, as community organizers, created Malvern Votes, an organization that was going to get one of the larger communities, neighborhoods in the constituency to try and engage voter turnout. So we had a couple of provincial elections and municipal elections, and we really worked on civic engagement and getting people to exercise their franchise and getting out to vote. And through activism in the local schools and the local community, people started to see me as an agitator and an activist locally who they knew was already fighting for themselves, for the local community. When we actually launched the campaign, the election campaign, the writ dropped and the campaign was launched, it was such a beautiful opportunity for us to really galvanize the community. For me, it was critically important that we ran an election campaign that was going to put women at the forefront. As a young woman, I made sure that my campaign manager was also a strong woman, and our office manager was a strong woman. And that was important for me to see myself represented in the team that was around us, because the candidate search committee was a group of Tamil men, and I needed to make sure that women were represented. And when we designed how that campaign was going to go, we made sure that we had a campaign where we were talking to the women in the community. To be honest, women have traditionally been sidelined or told to exclude ourselves, to self-select out in conversations of politics and nation building. Whereas in families and communities, it's really the women who are the glues that holds the families and communities together. So I needed to make sure that we were talking to the women and including the women in the conversation, and that we were including the children. The youth were engaged in my campaign. My youngest volunteer, I remember, was 4 years old and who was sitting there putting on stickers and writing things with markers. And my oldest volunteer was an 87-year-old. And we had the entire gambit of age covered. We had a huge Tamil community support, people from all walks of life, people from all communities, all neighborhoods came out to Scarborough to help, because our campaign was a really strong campaign where there was a real possibility of a Tamil person being elected into Parliament. And also, so many other people from so many other communities recognized and felt like I was their daughter, I was their sister, I was somebody who they could recognize as their family member. We had a targeted Filipino community campaign team. We had a targeted Indian community campaign team. We had a targeted Caribbean community campaign team, and really worked to build on my social justice activism. I mean, I was in the Philippines representing Canada and fighting for the Morong 43, who were political prisoners, for their social justice activism in the Philippines. And I had done this stuff before I got into politics. And so that social justice activism and my community development work is really what springboarded me into federal politics. Now, we made this historical win in 2011, and Scarborough Rouge River, that community went from having the second lowest voter turnout in Ontario to we increased voter turnout by, I think it was, oh gosh, I don't remember the statistic off the top of my head. I want to say 43% in that one election. It was amazing. The the turnaround in the community was phenomenal in voter participation. And that was a huge win for our community. And Scarborough Rouge River elected the first ever woman to represent that community federally. First ever person of color to represent that community, that constituency federally. First ever Tamil person to be elected to a federal parliament outside of Asia. Scarborough Rouge River elected the youngest federal member of parliament from the province of Ontario. The community made a lot of history in taking their chance on giving me the privilege of serving that community as their representative, to be the voice for so many who had been pushed into the margins. And the realities of being the first member of parliament who is of Tamil descent, or being a young brown woman in an old white man's world. The Canadian Parliament was set up for old white men. And I had an interesting experience. It was good, bad, and ugly. It was great because so many young people and so many people of color and white people too, felt inspired by the fact that we could have so many young people and a woman of color, especially from Northeast Scarborough, where it had never been NDP before, actually elect somebody. And that was a beautiful experience. The hard work of being able to help so many individuals with their immigration, seniors with their pensions, people with their employment insurance concerns, one-on-one, being able to help people, extremely difficult, but also hugely rewarding work. The media, though, was a fun playground for a young brown woman in an old white man's world, where people cared more about some days, back in the day, they cared more about the color of lipstick I was wearing instead of the words that were coming out of my mouth. Because that was something that we needed to be critical about of a young woman, rather than the contribution she was making to policy and legislative change in this country. I had certain ministers across the aisle who would be there every single time I was scheduled to speak, would make sure they were present, and would heckle me every single time to throw me off my game, to make sure that I didn't sound articulate, so that they could trip and fall. The Tamil community even had very different expectations of me as a member of parliament than they would have any other member of parliament. Rightfully so. As a Tamil person, I am expected to really understand the pain points of the community better. I believe I did. I do, as somebody who is a survivor and somebody who is a member of the community. Yet I was expected by many to push for and work towards having a free Tamil. And when I wasn't able to deliver that as an independent, not independent, as an opposition member of parliament, I was seen as a failure. However, were those expectations ever placed on any other members of parliament? If I was a man, would that same type of expectation have been placed on me? We can talk about the realities now, because after me, there has been a Tamil man elected to the Canadian Parliament. And to my understanding, those same expectations are not placed on him. And he is not judged as harshly as I was. So being the first, being the one who blazes a trail, yes, we have different expectations on our shoulders. Are they fair? I guess the test of time is how we figure that out. For me, it is critically important that we continue being in action. So yes, of course, in 2015, when I didn't win my re-election, I took time for myself and I jumped into education. I jumped into the world of being a college professor, and my area of expertise is really in business, is in people leadership and people management, human resources and labor relations. So I started teaching business and leadership, and now I'm a full-time faculty at Centennial College, and that's what I'm doing as my full-time gig. but my need for social justice activism continued in me. And so while I was a sitting member of parliament, I traveled to Sri Lanka for the first time since I had left as a 5-year-old. And I was able to take a friend of mine with me who's a filmmaker. Chithra, I'm tying into your world now, who's a filmmaker, and took him with me. And we captured a whole bunch of footage of my first experience being there. We were under siege. We were under constant surveillance. I had to deal with field interrogations. And for me, it was really an opportunity for me to meet my family who I had fled 27 years prior. And I wanted to meet my family, see my family home, and really get to know the land that connects me to my umbilical cord into that land. And as of 2022, we made a film that finally came out last year called Ray of Hope. So now I'm in the world of filmmaking too. So Ray of Hope is a documentary film. It's a feature-length documentary film. It focuses on the genocide of Tamils. It focuses on the intergenerational trauma and the strength of Tamil mothers. The film really looks at the 26-year armed conflict, the war. It celebrates the resilience of Tamils, the strength, and our hope for a better future to come. Our film, I'm really proud of what our little film has done. We've won over 16 prestigious awards at film festivals. We were nominated for 68 awards across 22 film festivals worldwide. We were in the for your consideration phase for the 97th Academy Awards. It just finished. The transcript of the movie is in the permanent record of the Academy. And now we're going for the Canadian Screen Awards, and we'll see how that goes. And a really exciting piece is that the documentary, even though we've played in film festivals in so many places around the world, we've been in the theaters here in Canada and in Los Angeles. We're now available in Canada in the Canadian broadcaster CBC's streaming service online. So for me, it's a huge win for us to be able to continue to tell our stories, to be able to have increasing awareness and advocacy for Tamils. And I recognize the time, and I want to talk about how advocacy doesn't have to be through politics. It could be through anything. It could be through the community organizing, the grassroots movements, through economic empowerment and entrepreneurship. For me, I decided though I was a college professor, I needed, as a single mom, you need multiple incomes. So I started my own small business in HR consulting, and as a mediator, I do mediation. And building that empowerment for myself and for my daughter to see that as a woman, we don't need to depend on anybody else. We can take care of ourselves, and the types of social impact that we can have through whether it's ethical sourcing of our materials or with whom I'm willing to engage in contracts, the mentorship that I engage in now, because I learned the value that I got from the few mentors that I've had along the way. I do my best to support and mentor people. And today, as a college professor, I get to educate people and mentor them and make sure that I'm creating spaces where there's a lot of critical thinking, there's civic engagement, and safe spaces for people to be their true selves. And so we could continue our advocacy work through education, through obviously media, art, storytelling. Chithra is a great example, and I think Ray of Hope is a phenomenal example as well. And of course, the cultural and social change that we're doing. I know time is tight, and I just want to close by saying that for me so far, my life has been of a reality of breaking barriers, often the only woman, the only Tamil person in spaces that were not built for me. And I've always had to pull up a chair because nobody was pulling up a chair for me. Or like I said earlier, build my own table, because action is what I needed to do, not waiting is the only way forward. Whether it was stepping into politics, creating the documentary, building my business, I know firsthand that change doesn't come when we ask for permission. We just need to accelerate action. So thank you so much, folks. And I look forward to having more conversations with you all and to learn about what you folks are going to do to make your own action happen. Thank you.
You so much. Thank you so much, Rathika Sitsabaiesan. We are much pleased to have you with your thoughtful, empowering speech and insightful, progressive ideas. ரொம்ப சிறப்பா சொன்னீங்க. நாங்களா தமிழ் பள்ளியில ஒரு 15 வருஷமா நான்லாம் ஒர்க் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கேன். நீங்க தமிழ் பள்ளியே சின்ன வயசுல தொடங்குறதுக்கு எவ்வளவு பாடுபட்டீங்கன்னு சொன்னது ரொம்ப சிறப்பா இருந்துச்சு. ஒரு அயல் நாடுகள்ல வளர்ற உங்களை மாதிரி குழந்தைங்க இவ்வளவு ஒரு சிறப்பான உயரத்தை அடைஞ்சிருக்குது வந்து ரொம்ப போற்றுதலுக்குரியது. ஒரு சமூக போராளியாவே நீங்க இருந்திருக்கீங்க. இன்னும் உங்களோட பணியில மிக சிறப்பாக வளர்றதுக்கு எங்களோட வாழ்த்துகள். ரொம்ப உங்களை நினைச்சு பெருமைப்படுறோம். ஒரு பெண்ணா என்னால சாதிக்க முடியும் அப்படின்னு சாதிச்சு காமிச்சிருக்கீங்க சமூகத்துக்கு முன்னாடி. விருந்தினர்களாக வந்த ராதிகா சித்சபேஷனுக்கும் சித்ரா ஜெயராமன் அவர்களுக்கும் எங்களோட புரட்சிக்கவிஞர் பாரதிதாசன் தமிழ் மன்றத்தின் சார்பாக நன்றிகளை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறோம். இப்போ வந்து கேள்வி பதில் செஷன். This is a Q&A session. If you like to ask questions, please raise your hand, virtual hand in the window. We'll unmute you. துரைக்கண்ணன் ஐயா, நீங்க உங்க கேள்வி கேட்கலாம். கையை உயர்த்திருக்கீங்க.
வணக்கம். ரொம்ப இன்று மகளிர் நாள். அதுல 2 சிறப்பான 2 மாறுபட்ட துறைகளில் சாதித்து கொண்டிருக்கும் 2 பெண்கள் இன்று வந்து ஒரு அருமையான பேச்சு. இதை கேட்கும் பிற பெண்களுக்கும் ஊக்கம் ஒரு வகையில 2 மாறுபட்ட துறையில இருந்து பேசினாங்க. அது ரொம்ப போற்றுவதற்கு உரியது. இந்த நிகழ்ச்சியுடைய நோக்கமே வந்து இது மாதிரியான ஒரு மாறுபட்ட துறைகளில் இருப்பவர்களை கொண்டு வந்து நம்முடைய தமிழ் சமூகத்துக்கு அறிமுகப்படுத்தணும். அது மூலம் அடுத்து வரும் தலைமுறை அத்தகைய துறைகளை தேர்ந்தெடுத்து மேல வரணுங்கிறதுக்காக தான் இந்த ஒரு முயற்சியை வந்து எடுத்தோம். அந்த அடிப்பில் நீங்க 2 பேருமே ரொம்ப சிறப்பா பேசுனீங்க. இருவருக்கும் மனமோந்த நன்றிகள். இந்த நேரத்துல உங்க 2 பேரும் எனக்கு யாரை கூப்பிடலாம் சொல்லி தேடிட்டு இருந்தப்ப இந்த பாத்தீங்க அப்படின்னா அமெரிக்காவா இருக்கட்டும், அமெரிக்கால மற்ற வட அமெரிக்காலையும் வந்து இது மாதிரியான ஒரு மாறுபட்ட துறைகளில் அரிய துறைகளில் சாதித்த பெண்கள்ங்கிறது குறிப்பா தமிழ் சமூகத்துல வந்து ரொம்ப குறைவா தான் இருக்காங்க. அதுல எங்களுக்கு உங்களை மாதிரியான சாதித்த பெண்களை தேடி கண்டுபிடிப்புங்கிறதே ஒரு பெரும் பாடாக இருந்தது. பல நண்பர்கள் மூலமும் முயற்சி செய்து குறிப்பா நாங்க 4 பேரை வந்து இந்த நிகழ்ச்சி கொண்டு வரணும்னு நினைச்சோம். ஆனா எங்களுக்கு 2 துறையில இருந்தா எங்களுக்கு இருந்த நேரத்துல எங்களுக்கு தெரிந்த அறிமுகத்தின் மூலமாக எங்களால கண்டுபிடிக்க முடிந்தது. அப்படிப்பட்ட ஒரு நம்ம தமிழ் சமூகம் என்பது இன்னும் வந்து பாத்தீங்க அப்படின்னா ஒரு மருத்துவம் இல்லைன்னா பொறியியல், இன்ஜினியரிங், சட்டம் அது மாதிரியான துறைகள்ல தான் நிறைய ஆர்வத்தை பெற்றோர்கள் வந்து தன் குழந்தைகள் ஆர்வத்தை ஊட்டி குழந்தைகள் அதுலதான் நிறைய போயிட்டு இருக்காங்க. இல்லைன்னா வந்து இன்று பாத்தீங்க அப்படின்னா கணினித்துறை அதுல அதிகமான வருமானம் வருது அப்படிங்கிறதுல. ஆனால் கூட இந்த மாதிரியான ஒரு மாறுபட்ட துறைகளில் நம்ம புலம்பெயர்ந்த இடங்கள்ல தமிழ் குழந்தைகள் குறிப்பாக பெண்கள் அனைத்து துறைகளிலும் சிறப்பாக கோல் வச்ச வேணுங்கிறது தான் எங்களுடைய எண்ணம். அந்த அடிப்படையில் அந்த நிகழ்ச்சியை ஏற்பாடு செய்தோம். உங்க இருவருக்கும் மிக்க நன்றி. எனக்கு வந்து 2 பேரிடமே கேள்விகள் உண்டு. அந்த கேள்விகளை நான் கேட்பதற்கு முன் இந்த நிகழ்ச்சி உங்க 2 பேரும் எனக்கு கண்டுபிடித்து எனக்கு அறிமுகப்படுத்திய திரு நண்பர் பாலா சுவாமிநாதன் அவர்களுக்கு எனது நன்றியை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறேன். நான் இப்ப உங்க எம்பி அவங்க ரத்திகா அவங்ககிட்ட வந்து நீங்க அந்த அளவுக்கு கடினப்பட்டு நீங்க சொன்னீங்க எதுவுமே கேட்டு கிடைக்காத சொன்னீங்க. அந்த மாதிரி கிடைத்த ஒரு இளம் வயதிலேயே ஒரு சாதனையாளராக முதல் தமிழ் பாராளுமன்ற உறுப்பினர் வந்த நீங்கள் இன்றைய நம்மளுடைய ஈழத்தில் இருக்கக்கூடிய இந்த காலச்சூழல்ல அங்க வந்து ஒரு புரட்சிகரமான போராட்டம் எடுத்து அந்த போராட்டம் முடிவுக்கு வந்த பிறகு அடுத்த ஒரு அரசியல் தீர்வு தான் தீர்வாக இருக்கும். நம்ம அரசியல் மூலமாக இதற்கு தீர்வு காண வேண்டும் அந்த நேரத்துல நீங்க அதுல தொடர்ந்து முயற்சிக்கிறதற்கு நீங்க பல காரணங்கள் சொன்னீங்க. அதிகாரம்ங்கிறது வந்து பல விடயங்களை நமக்கு சாதிக்கிற உதவுங்கிற அடிப்படையில அதுல மீண்டும் அதில் ஈடுபடுவதற்கான அரசியலில் ஈடுபட்டு உங்கள் மனதிலே தீயாக எரிந்து கொண்டிருக்க அந்த எண்ணத்தை நிறைவேற்றுவதற்கான முயற்சியில் ஈடுபடுவதற்கான எண்ணம் உங்களுக்கு உள்ளதா அப்படிங்கிறது. அதே நேரத்துல அங்க நம்மளுடைய ஈழ குழந்தைகள் வந்து துப்பாக்கிகளை தூங்கிய பெண் போராளிகளை உலகத்தில் வேற எங்கும் பார்க்காத அளவுக்கு அருகில் இருந்து பார்த்து வளர்ந்த ஒரு சமூகம் போருக்கு பின்னால் அவர்கள் ஒரு சோர்வடைந்த மனநிலையில் இருக்கும்போது நீங்க உலகத்தில் உள்ள ஒரு பெரிய நாட்டினுடைய எம்பியாக அங்க நீங்க போன பொழுது அவர்களுடைய இங்க இருக்கும் பெண்கள் அங்க இருக்க பெண் குழந்தைகள் மனநிலை என்னவாக இருந்தது அப்படிங்கிறத பத்தி நீங்க சொன்னீங்கன்னா சிறப்பா இருக்கும். நன்றி.
Okay, well, two things, I guess. I'm not sure உங்களோட கேள்வி if I fully correctly understand it. இது நீங்கள் இங்க கனடாவில திரும்ப பாலிடிக்ஸ்ல ரீஎன்டர் பண்றதுக்கு இஷ்டம் இருக்குதுன்னு
கனடால பாலிடிக்ஸ்ல இருந்து இல்ல கனடால பாலிடிக்ஸ்ல இருந்து ஈழத்தினுடைய தமிழ் ஈழம் கிடைப்பதற்காக இங்க இருந்து நம்ம வந்து இப்ப புலம்பெயர் தமிழர் தான் உலகத்தினுடைய we are working from the diaspora is working throughout the world wherever they are, right? I mean, this is a great opportunity to be in political power, to do the advocacy to achieve Tamil Eelam. On that front, I'm wondering whether you have again look into the look into your career of politics and
right. Okay,
do something. That's my first question.
Absolutely. I mean, being in positions of power in politics can definitely help to push the agenda forward with the first and foremost, the recognition of genocide and the establishment of the independent nation state of Tamil Eelam, right? That's not the only way to do it, though. Since 2015, when I stopped being a member of parliament, I didn't stop my advocacy work. I have continued, and actually now as an independent individual Canadian, working with so many of the global diaspora, we have been able to make truly more meaningful impact in the global scene through engaging with the UN mechanism, through working with the global diaspora and unifying our voices as much as possible, where our members of our diaspora are willing to come together and work together. We have been doing that work, and we have been making significant inroads. Even the movie is a contribution to that work, right? Because if you've had a chance to watch the film Ray of Hope, you know that it's the first ever documentary that's been made in English, full-length documentary that's talking about the stories and lived experiences of the resilience of Tamils. We've had documentaries like No Fire Zone and The Killing Field of Sri Lanka, where they show the wars and the atrocities, the gory side of the experience, where really it pulls your heart out. What we try to do is, through film, because this is a way that we can reach so many different people who are not traditionally engaged in politics, we can reach them in their homes, in their movie theaters, to learn about the genocide of Tamils. Because even people here in Canada who know me, who know many Tamil people, don't know the reality, the truth of the genocide of Tamils by the Sri Lankan state. So that ongoing genocide needs to be recognized. And yes, it would be great if we had politicians who are on board and supporting us. And so, yes, if I was in the House of Parliament right now, it would help, I'm certain. However, we do need to engage more people. Am I working towards a re-entry into politics? Right now, the answer is no. I've learned, though, from Jack and through my lived experience now to never say never. Anything is possible. But right now, my focus is healing myself, building and pouring into my daughter to interrupt that intergenerational trauma, passage of that trauma to her. I want for her to live a life where she knows anything is possible and she doesn't need to be bound by a lot of the societal constrictions that I or many of our sisters were bound by. And your second question was about what might have been the thoughts of the young women and girls.
Yeah, exactly right. When the
when
conflict
I was first elected, and the shift in being women who were leading the fight, right? Having the Karambulihal or the women, what are they called? Battalions of women was an innovative way of fighting for our lands. And yes, women led so many ways. And if you look at I think the book is somewhere right here. The ways of our leader Velupula Prabhakaran, Annan was very much about treating everybody with equality, equity, and justice. And that it didn't matter if you were a male, female, woman, man. If you had the capacity to do it, you were put in those positions of leadership. And that's generally the type of society that I want to be part of. And that's a society that he was building and that our community is capable of. We are a community that is progressive and resilient and strong. And so I'm not going to pretend to know what was going through the minds of those girls or women or grandmas. All I know is what they have shared with me, and that in that moment, it was an opportunity to see the light, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is, maybe, watch me play on words here, a little sliver, a little ray of hope. And that we could as a community, but it's not on me. It's really the community coming together. It's about us as a diaspora community reaching out to me, other Canadians, you folks, other Americans, people in Germany, to other Germans and whatever. We are scattered around the world, and to bring those community members to also work with us, to join arms with us, and for us to build that advocacy community. So I can't speak for what was going through other people's minds.
Thank you.
I'm just grateful for the opportunities.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rathika. பாலாயா, நீங்க உங்களை அன்மியூட் பண்ணிட்டு பேசலாம்.
பாரதிதாசன் தமிழ் மன்றத்திற்கு முதலில் நன்றியை தெரிவித்துக் கொள்கிறேன். உலக பெண்கள் நாள் விழாவிற்காக. இந்த இதுல 2 பெண் ஆளுமைகளை கூட்டு வந்து இந்த மாதிரி அவங்களுடைய அனுபவங்களை பகிர்ந்து கொள்வது மாதிரி பல பெண்களை கூட்டு வந்து பகிர்ந்து கொள்ளணும். அதுதான் நம்மளுடைய இதுக்கு ஒரு நல்ல இலக்காக இருக்கும் என்பதை உணர்த்தியதற்கு நன்றி. நீங்க 2 பேருமே இருக்கிற ஃபீல்ட்ஸ் வந்து அரசியல், அப்புறம் இந்த சினிமாவில் இங்க அமெரிக்காவில் சினிமாவில் எடுத்துட்டு இருக்கிறீங்க. 2மே ஆண்கள் அதிகமாக ஆதிக்கம் செலுத்தும் கேட்டகரிஸ் தான், ஃபீல்டு தான். 2லையுமே அதிக அளவில் இருக்கிறாங்க. ஆதிக்கம் மட்டும் இல்லை, அவங்களுக்கு கிடைக்கக்கூடிய சம்பளங்களும் அந்த மாதிரி வித்தியாசமாக இருக்கும். அந்த மாதிரியான ஃபீல்டு தான் நீங்க 2 பேருமே இருக்கிறது. இதுல வந்து உங்களுக்கு சில தடைக்கற்கள், இந்த ரோட் பிளாக்ஸ் அப்படின்னு வரும் பொழுது அதை வந்து எப்படி நீங்க சமாளிக்கிறீங்க? நீங்க முறையிடுவீங்களா? நான் ஈரோடு தமிழன்பன் ஐயா ஒரு 3 வரி கவிதைகள்ல சொல்லுவாரு, சிலம்பை உடைத்து என்ன பயன், அரியணையிலும் அந்த கொல்லன் தான் இருக்கிறான் அப்படின்னு. அது நம்ம போய் ஒரு இதை ஒரு கம்ப்ளைண்ட் பண்ணணும் இல்லை எங்கேயாவது போகணும்னாக்கா அங்கேயும் சேம் பீப்புள் தான் இருக்க போறாங்க. அப்படி இருக்கும் பொழுது நம்ம என்ன பண்றது? அந்த மாதிரியான தாட்ஸ் வருமா? ஹவ் யூ ஹேண்டில் இட் as a woman or as a director? நீங்க எப்படி பண்ணுவீங்க? அதுக்கு சித்ரா நியூயார்க்ல நீங்க இருக்கிறீங்க, அதனால if you could answer that would be nice.
Sure.
And then I would like to hear Ms. Rathika's views also, especially with related to politics. Situations vandadunaka, how you handle that, the matter roadblocks. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really good question, right? Like, so I would say starting with pick your battles, right? You can't go into like, but for example, like very early profession ஆரம்பிக்கிறப்போ initially I only wanted to direct and produce. I wasn't thinking of myself as a technical person, but very soon technical fields la women ரொம்ப கம்மி, like camera operating or editing or sound mixing, color correction, இதுல எல்லாம் பாத்தீங்கன்னா it's only men. So as a director, if or a director producer, you have a certain artistic vision, கதை இப்படிதான் பண்ணணும்னு போய் சொன்னோன்னா there is huge resistance that they know the technical field, உனக்கு தெரியாது இது எப்படி பண்ணணும்ட்டு. So for example, நான் first documentary பண்றப்போ I used to hire people and there were very few. இப்போ நிறைய women இருக்காங்க, but ஸ்டார்ட் பண்றப்போ very few women camera operators were there. So hire பண்ணோன்னா very simple things like if you're சின்ன குழந்தைய ஃபில்ம் பண்றீங்கன்னா அவங்க லெவல்ல போய் கேமரா பிடிச்சி பண்ணுங்க, அந்த மாதிரி if you make suggestions they wouldn't listen. They'll be like இல்ல இது இப்படிதான் பண்ணணும் அப்படிதான் பண்ணணும், and there'll be this arguments or discussions and things. So I started operating the camera. So all my films I shoot just out of necessity that it was affecting my creative vision. So either half the battle was இங்க இருக்கிறத வந்து இன்னொருத்தர் கையை கொடுக்கறது பதிலா அந்த கேமராவை நான் பிடிச்சேன்னா it was making it closer to my vision. So so all my films I operate the camera and I edit, because I feel like otherwise those two fields affect what comes on camera. And it was இப்போ இந்த வாட்டி ஆஸ்கர் the director of Anora, right? Like when a man does it, like so he wrote the film, he edited the film, and he won the screenplay, he won the directing, and he won the editing award and the best picture for the film. But when a man does all of these things, they're never going to ask him, you've taken on too many roles. But every single time I do that, they'll be like, why? Like the assumption is you're doing all of this because you can't afford people, not that you're choosing to do this for your creative vision, right? So so I don't tell everybody I do everything. I just tell I directed the film. When they see it in the credits, they can figure out that I also, every single one of my films I shot it and I edited it. So and knowing technical skills, so that's one way to handle that, right? And in terms of distribution is a huge barrier. Is a huge barrier. So instead of expecting people to distribute, I have created my own pathway. So I would say that I'm fairly economically sustainable because of creating that pathway. So sometimes you have to do the things, and then I have created teams of women that I work with, and I have to also create role models of better leadership, collaborative leadership, and working within almost every community group I'm a part of is a collective where there is much more of a democratic leadership position. So those are the ways with which I'm working around that. Yeah, thank you.
Rathika, உங்களோட கருத்தையும்.
I guess I'm adding the politics angle to this. Because I'm not a filmmaker. I just was a catalyst to make a film. So I don't know any of those technical things you talk about, Chithra. But let me talk about, I guess, being a huge challenge for me is being the first or being the only, right? Walking into rooms where I was the only young brown woman who was expected to be an assistant. I would go to events and, you know, you check in at the welcome desk and they'd be like, oh, and you're here with whom? Because I was going to the VIP table to check in, and they'd be like, oh, you're here checking in for whom? Oh, Rathika Sitsabaiesan, the member of parliament. Okay, and they're going to be joining soon? It's like, no, I'm her. Hi, I'm her. And, you know, that expectation from people that because I'm a woman, because I'm a brown person, because I'm young compared to everybody else, that I was supposed to be somebody's assistant, and being not seeing me on any screens before me, not seeing or knowing that there were people who walked that path is quite a challenge. And so for me, what I did was I leaned back into my community roots. So for me, in the world of labor organizing, there were many Black women who had paved their own paths. And no, it's not the same path that I was walking, but it was a very similar path. And so I had strong sisters in labor who were able to share their learning, share their experiences, and also shoulder some of the burden for me, and help open doors sometimes, and really supported me. I had to constantly prove myself, prove that I'm intelligent, that I'm able to be a lawmaker, that I had the experience, the leadership, the expertise, the credibility to be able to be in these rooms, these conversations when you are writing legislation or making changes, speaking in the parliament. And of course, being the first, you have that weight of the representation on your shoulders, right? I was always expected to speak for the entire community. By no way could I have that token experience, right? There's no way that I could speak for the entire Tamil community or the entire experience of young women or women of color. Yet many spaces I was put into expecting that I was going to be able to speak on behalf of the entire intersectionality of whichever community that I was representing. Navigating sexism and racism, those are both very real in Canada, and they're very real in the spaces of politics, facing microaggressions and overt forms of aggression from colleagues, from the media, and even constituents who felt like I wasn't good enough. Like I mentioned earlier, I was constantly judged more harshly than the men, than my white counterparts. In debates and personal choices, whatever it was, and constantly having those double standards, right? Where if this is, I've said this so many times, you know, when a male is strong and powerful, he's defined as assertive and a good leader. But when a woman of color is strong and powerful, she's aggressive, she's too ambitious, she's, you know, out to get gold digger, trying to make a way for herself and not really doing things to build community. So there's double standards. And I know that I had always had to work 3 times harder to be treated less than equal. And that is and was my reality. And my goal is that for Maya and for the young women and girls who come after me, that it's different. Like I said earlier, those barriers to the old boys club or the networks, those networks didn't exist. So I had to create my own other avenues to have access to mentorship and networks to get that support. I mean, in the movie I talk about, and I haven't spoken too much about it. When I was a sitting MP, I had the opportunity to speak in Geneva at the Human Rights Council. I was going to be the 3rd speaker after the Secretary General had done the opening speeches, because one of the NGOs had given me their space to talk about the genocide of Tamils. But I was sidelined by the leadership of the party to not participate. And I was going to face punishment if I had gone. So there's that expectation, and maybe we call it, you know, the pet to threat where a young woman of color is treated as a pet and supported until she grows so powerful that, oh no, now she's a threat and needs to be sidelined. With Jack, I was thriving, but then he passed away, and my experience really shifted when Jack passed away. Community expectations, I spoke about this, right? And how there's a difference in expectations for me versus somebody else who is a member of parliament as well. And with the world of politics, that personal sacrifice and mental load, and I'm sure in filmmaking too, Chithra, like burnout, constantly saying that I'm not working and hard enough when I knew that I was working harder than anybody else who was there, right? I knew that I was working 97% and playing 3% of the time, and everybody was telling me that I was going to burn out real fast, and I did burn out, but it was real, dealing with harassment in person, online, threats. I had people threaten my life because I wasn't doing good enough work, doing what they were expecting me to do. I refused to be a puppet for anybody, any one organization or another. I refused to be a puppet, and I had threats on my life. But I had to always show up in the public, not afraid, because I needed to know that I was doing everything I could to be that strong woman, to be out there, strong leader, to be out there. I had to make choices about my personal life because I was in the public life. There's so much extra scrutiny on a young woman in politics than there would be on a white man in politics, or a man in politics for that, right? So for me, I guess there's a lot of these challenges. And again, I'm going to come back to the theme for this year is action. And so I did everything I could to support mentorship initiatives, to invite and actually bring young women into my offices. Almost, except one young man I hired, all of my staff were young women, because I wanted to make sure that I was opening doors to have young women in those spaces of power where they could negotiate and be involved in parliament, in the world of politics. I continue to do that as much as I can today.
Thank you. ரொம்ப நன்றிங்க ரெண்டு பேருக்குமே.
Sorry if that was a long answer. There's so many.
ரெண்டு பேருமே took a deep dive. ரொம்ப ரொம்ப நன்றி. நீங்க சொன்னது வந்து சித்ராவுக்கும் பொருந்தும். அவங்க வந்து அம்மா ஸ்ப்ரைடு வந்து இதே ஒரு மென் டைரக்ட் பண்ணியிருந்தாக்க it would have reached so many other avenues and other thingsங்கிறது நமக்கும் தெரியுது. Yeah, we see the pain. நன்றிங்க ரெண்டு பேருக்கும்.
நன்றி பாலையா. ரொம்ப சிறப்பா சொன்னீங்க. உயர்ந்த நிலையில இருக்க பெண்களுக்கு இவ்வளவு தூரம் எவ்வளவு தடைகளை தாண்டி வந்திருக்கீங்க அப்படிங்கறத ரொம்ப விரிவா சொன்னீங்க. மிக்க நன்றி. துரைக்கண்ணன், உங்களோட கை ரைஸ் ஆயிருக்கா?
நன்றி. நான் பேசுறதுக்கு முன்னாடி வேற யாருக்கும் கேள்விகள் கேட்கணும்னு தான் கையை உயர்த்தினீங்கன்னா உங்களை கூப்பிடுவாங்க. அடுத்ததாக என்னோட கேள்வி வந்து சித்ராவுக்கு. சித்ராவோட என்னோட ஒரு இன்ட்ரெஸ்டிங் கான்வர்சேஷன் ஆக, பொதுவாக நாங்கள் வந்து எங்க அமைப்புல வந்து முதல் நாளிலிருந்து போடுறப்ப ஆண் பெண் வேறுபாடு இல்லாம தான் எங்க அமைப்புல வந்து எல்லா வேலையும் பண்ணுவோம். அந்த அடிப்படையில பேர்களை போடும்போது கூட திருமதி அப்படின்னு போடுறது இல்லை, திருமிகு. அது வந்து பாத்தீங்கன்னா அது பொதுவான ஒரு பால், அது வந்து ஜெண்டர் நியூட்ரல். அது மாதிரிதான் நாங்க வந்து திருமிகு தான் எல்லாத்துலயும் போடுவோம். ஆனா ஆங்கிலத்துல போடுறப்ப எனக்கு அது எப்படி போடுறதுன்னு தெரியல எனக்கு. அதனால போடாம விட்டால் நம்ம 2 பேரும் கூப்பிடுறோம், 2 ஆளுமையில கூப்பிடுறப்ப அவங்க வந்து அதை தவற நினைத்துக்க கூடாதே அப்படிங்கறதுக்காக நான் மிஸ் அப்படின்னு சொல்லி போட்டேன். ஸோ தட் ரிக்வயர்ட் அ குட் கான்வர்சேஷன். சித்ரா வந்து இமிடியேட்டா போட்டு அந்த மிஸ்ஸும் போடுறதை நீங்க எடுத்தீங்கன்னா நல்லா இருக்கும் அப்படிங்கிற we were going back and forth. I just அவங்கள்ட்ட நான் அந்த காரணங்கள் ஏன் போட்டேன் அப்படிங்கிறத சொன்னேன். அவங்க வந்து ஒரு ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் சொன்னாங்க, எனக்கு வந்து அது ரொம்ப இதா இருந்தது. All the words in front feels colonial, honorable, highness, etc. So I generally feel that is unnecessary. It is a great equalizer, just like I refuse to put caste surnames. அவங்க எந்த அளவுக்கு அந்த 2 ஸ்டேட்மெண்ட் வந்து அவங்க எந்த அளவுக்கு ஸ்ட்ராங்கா எந்த ஒரு இந்த மாதிரி நீங்க பாத்தீங்கன்னா திருமிகும் சொன்னாலும் சரி, இல்ல வேற எது சொன்னாலும் அது ஒருவரை இன்னொருத்தவங்களை வேறுபடுத்தி உயர்த்தி தாழ்த்தி காமிக்கிறதா அது கூடாது அப்படிங்கிறதுல அவங்க ரொம்ப ஸ்ட்ராங்கா இருந்தாங்க. அது வந்து ஒரு ஐ ஓப்பனர் மாதிரி தான் எனக்கு. இருந்தாலும் தமிழ்ல போட்டு ஆங்கிலத்துக்கு சரியான சொல் தெரியல. தேங்க்யூ சித்ரா ஃபார் தட். நீங்க அந்த மாதிரி வளர்ந்து வந்த ஒரு சூழல்ல நீங்களே சொன்னீங்க, பெண்ணுனா நீ பெண்ணா இதை பண்ற, பெண்ணால முடியாது சொல்லி வளர்ந்த அந்த ஒரு சூழல்ல நீங்க அமெரிக்காவுக்கு வந்துட்டீங்க. இங்கேயும் படம் எடுக்கிறீங்க. படம் எடுக்கும் பொழுதும் கூட நீங்க வந்து ஒரு சாதாரண வேற ஏதோ நான் வந்து டாக்குமெண்ட்ரி எடுத்தாலும் வேற சப்ஜெக்ட் எல்லாம் எடுத்தாலும் பண்ணாலும் கூட ஒரு டிரான்ஸ்ஜெண்டர் ரிலேட்டடா அந்த மாதிரியான பிரச்சனை எல்லாம் எடுக்கிறப்ப என்கிட்ட உங்கள்ட்ட இருக்க கேள்விகள் என்ன அப்படின்னா, நீங்க அமெரிக்கால பெண்கள், நம்மளுடைய தமிழ் பெண்கள் உங்கள்கிட்ட சந்திக்கிறப்ப, உங்கள்கிட்ட பேசுறப்ப, நீங்க அந்த மாதிரி பண்றப்ப அவங்க என்ன மாதிரி உங்களை அணுகுனாங்க? வாட் இஸ் தி ஹவு தே இன்டராக்டட் வித் யூ when you do something like that? ஏன்னா பொதுவாக நம்ம தமிழ் கம்யூனிட்டியில வந்து கொஞ்சம் டிரான்ஸ்ஜெண்டர் அந்த அளவுக்கு அவ்வளவு எளிதா வந்து ஏற்றுக்கொள்ளக்கூடிய ஒரு மனநிலை கிடையாது. அதே மாதிரி பொதுவாக நீங்க பாக்குற இங்க இருக்க இந்தியன் கம்யூனிட்டி, தமிழ் கம்யூனிட்டி என்ன மாதிரியான இன்னும் வந்து என்ன மாதிரியான அமெரிக்காவுக்கு வந்த பிறகும் என்ன மாதிரியான ஒரு தாட் ப்ராசஸ்ல இருக்காங்க? இதை வந்து அக்செப்ட் பண்ணக்கூடிய ஒரு நிலையில இருக்காங்களா, இல்ல எப்படி இருக்காங்கிறது ஒரு கேள்வி. இன்னொன்னு, நீங்க தமிழ்நாட்டுல போய் இதே ஒரு கான்செப்டை வச்சு நீங்க படம் எடுக்கிறப்ப அங்க இருந்த பெண்கள் அதை எப்படி ரிசீவ் பண்ணா, நீங்க முதல்ல போய் அவங்கள்ட்ட பேசுறப்ப அதை எப்படி ரிசீவ் பண்ணாங்க? அது மாதிரி நீங்க இப்ப ஷோ போட்டு நீங்க நிறைய இடங்கள்ல இதை வந்து ஒரு அவேர்னஸ்க்காக ஷோ போட்டு இது பண்றதுலாம் என்ன மாதிரியான அவர்கள்ட்ட இருந்து கேள்விகள் வந்தது, என்ன மாதிரியான டிஸ்கஷன் அங்க நடந்தது அப்படிங்கறத சொன்னீங்கன்னா சிறப்பா இருக்கும். நன்றி.
So it's always இப்போ நான் அந்த எப்போ எங்க இருந்தாலும் பெண்கள் இப்போ பெண்கள் படத்துல வர மாதிரி, ஃபார் எக்ஸாம்பிள் நான் இந்த ராக்ஸ் டு பேட் பண்றப்போ இந்துமதி அவங்க பேரு, அந்த அவங்க ஃபர்ஸ்ட் நம்ம கிட்ட கேக்குற கேள்விலாம், உனக்கு கல்யாணம் இருக்கா, உனக்கு குழந்தைங்க இருக்காங்களா, உன்னோட வாழ்க்கை. ஸோ இட்ஸ் வெரி இன்ட்ரூசிவ் கொஸ்டின்ஸ் அண்ட் I'm okay asking that because அவங்க if someone is going to sit in front of the camera and share their life with me in ஆவண படத்துல, அவங்களுக்கும் என்ன பத்தி கேட்க உரிமை இருக்கு. அந்த கேள்விகளுக்கெல்லாம் நான் பதில் சொல்லணுங்கிற. ஸோ இட்ஸ் ஆல்வேஸ் there's always a lot of questions about my status as a woman and what I'm doing. In terms of படத்தை எடுத்தீங்கன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்களேன், for me பல வருஷங்களுக்கு முன்னாடி நான் வந்து சென்னையில இருக்கிறப்போ ஃபயர்னு ஒரு படம் வந்துச்சு, ஞாபகம் இருக்கா உங்களுக்கு? ஃபயர்னு ஒரு படம் அபவுட் பை தீபா மேத்தா அபவுட் லெஸ்பியன் ரிலேஷன்ஷிப். அந்த படம் வந்து வந்தப்போ ஐ திங்க் ஐ வாஸ் இன் ஃபர்ஸ்ட் இயர் காலேஜ் ஆர் சம்திங் லைக் தட். அண்ட் அந்த படத்தை பாக்குறதுக்கு நானும் என் தங்கையும் பெங்களூர் போனோம், ஓப்பனிங் டே போய் பாக்குறதுக்கு. And அப்போ வந்துட்டு like I don't think we fully had a vocabulary for all that, but I had a cousin who was coming out, and he there were very few people in the family he could tell that that he likes men and that he's wrestling with all of this. And so my sister and I were always talking with him about it. So we went to see the film. தியேட்டர்ல போனீங்கன்னா தியேட்டர்ல டிக்கெட் கொடுக்க மாட்டேன்ட்டாங்க எங்க ரெண்டு பேருக்கும். எதுக்கு like so it was treated as soft porn and men were there jerking off in the theater, and we insisted on watching the film. And அந்த ஒரு நாள் தான், அந்த அடுத்த நாள் theaters were burnt down and fire was not available to watch. So I think even before I had a language to talk about LGBT rights, I had a family member who was going through coming to terms with coming out and watching fire. And and then I also had a classmate in high school who was closeted, but we all there would be conversations around. So I think Chennai'la I happened to have very close lived experience of people coming out who were my peers who had so little support. So படத்துல அது கொண்டு வரணுங்கிறது came from the need that இப்போ ஒரு 10-20 வருஷத்துக்கு அப்புறமாவும் they are still living, they're coming out every single day at every instant. To some people they're not fully out, and that is really harmful and very hard for them. So அதனால இந்த படம் when I found this story, when that இப்படி ஒரு அம்மா வந்து without any problem fully coming on board, that was important to tell. இந்த படத்தை வந்து நாங்க ஒரு couple of slumsலாம் எடுத்துட்டு போய் காமிச்சோம். We wanted to see எப்படி மக்கள் இது என்ன இது ஆவரண படம். It was really important that this film was a documentary, because நான் இந்த கதையை எழுதியிருந்தேன்னு வச்சுக்கோங்களேன், இந்த கதையில ஒரு அம்மா வந்து ஃபுல்லா அக்செப்ட் பண்ணிருக்காங்க எழுதினால, தென் மக்கள் என்ன சொல்லுவாங்க, ஓ நீங்க கதையை தான் நீங்க எழுதிருக்கீங்க, இட்ஸ் வெரி கன்வீனியன்ட், இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு ஒரு ஆளை நீங்க வந்து உருவாக்கிடலாம், இந்த மாதிரி ஆளு நிஜ வாழ்க்கையில இருக்க வாய்ப்பு இல்லை. சோ அவங்க நிஜ வாழ்க்கையில இந்த மாதிரிதான் இருக்காங்கிறது இஸ் த பெஸ்ட் பார்ட் இன் த ஃபிலிம். நாங்க இந்த ஸ்லம்ல போய் காமிச்சப்போ அவங்க கிட்ட கேட்டோம், நீங்க ஆவரணம் படம் பாத்திருக்கீங்களான்ட்டு. அவங்க ஆவரணம் படம்னா என்னன்னு தெரியும், ஆனா பார்த்தது இல்ல, நீங்க பாக்குறீங்களான்னு சொல்லி கேட்டப்போ அவங்க எல்லாம் வந்து பார்த்தாங்க. பார்த்து முடிச்சதுக்கு அப்புறம் we asked them if you want, இதை பத்தி என்ன நினைக்கிறீங்கன்னு சொல்றீங்களான்னு கேட்டப்போ அவங்க ஒரு decided having a conversation. அதுல ஒரு அம்மா வந்துட்டு அவங்க சின்ன ஒரு 4-5 வயசு குழந்தை இருந்துச்சு. அந்த பாப்பாவை பிடிச்சிட்டு, என் பொண்ணு வந்து இன்னும் கொஞ்சம் நாள்ல இந்த மாதிரி ஏதாவது சொன்னான்னா நான் அவ பக்கத்துல இருப்பேன், அவ என்ன சூஸ் பண்ணாலும் அது எனக்கு ஓகே அப்படின்னாங்க ஒருத்தங்க. இன்னொருத்தவங்க வந்து சொன்னாங்க, they were feeling very bad. அவங்க சொன்னாங்க, நான் வந்து என் கிராமத்துல வந்துட்டு ஒரு 5-6 வருஷத்துக்கு முன்னாடி இந்த மாதிரி ஒருத்தவங்க வந்திருந்தாங்க, அவங்கள ரொம்ப நான் டீஸ் பண்ணி கஷ்டப்படுத்தினேன், எனக்கு இப்போ ரொம்ப சோகமா இருக்கு அந்த மாதிரி பண்ணினதுக்கு அப்படின்னாங்க ஒருத்தவங்க. அதுல வந்துட்டு ஒரு பாட்டி இருந்தாங்க, அவங்க வந்து இதெல்லாம் படத்துல நல்லா இருக்கு, நிஜ வாழ்க்கையில இருக்கு. தென் 3-4 பேர் அந்த பாட்டி கிட்ட சொல்லி, இது நிஜ வாழ்க்கை, இவங்க வீட்டுல அப்படிதான் இருக்காங்க, இவங்க தூத்துக்குடியில இருக்காங்க. So we didn't have to do all that. அவங்களுக்குள்ளே பேச ஆரம்பிச்சிட்டாங்க. So one of the things we want to do is actually the director வந்து இந்தியால இருக்காங்க, அப்புறம் இந்தியால ஒரு இம்பாக்ட் ப்ரொடியூசர் இருக்காங்க. So we are trying to petition to the minister in Tamil Nadu, because எல்லா கிராமத்திலயும் we want to show the film. Because once the film comes, the idea that ஒரு அம்மா இப்படி பண்ணலாம் பார்த்துட்டா, then it's easy. அந்த ஒரு 40 பேர் பார்த்ததுல ஒரு 3-4 அம்மாங்க told, என் குழந்தை இந்த மாதிரி இருந்தா நான் வந்து ஏத்துப்பேன், right? So that is what, like, I feel like by seeing the film, if maybe 1,000 people were able to have supportive family, that is worth it, right, to show the film. And I think படம் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்கிறப்போ எங்க டீமுக்குள்ளே இந்த இம்பாக்ட் ப்ரொடியூசர் வந்து இம்பாக்ட் ப்ரொடியூசரோட அங்கிள், அம்மாவோட பிரதர் வந்து இஸ் கே, அண்ட் பாட்டி வந்து has never fully kind of come around accepting him. அண்ட் பேத்தி வந்து இந்த படத்துல ஒர்க் பண்றான்னு தெரியும். அவங்க இன்னொரு பாட்டி, அவங்க வயசுல இருக்கிறவங்க கிட்ட ஏதோ பேசுறப்போ she was defending LGBT rights to this other party, even though she hasn't come around to her own. So people like even within the team, you're noticing just by being adjacent, there are ripple effects that is totally worth doing something like this. So yeah, that's my answer to that. I came from na chinna vayasula I was seeing this not being present, and given the opportunity that இந்த கதையை வந்து எவ்வளோக்கு எவ்வளோ, and we are also going to dub it in Hindi, and comparatively Tamil Nadu things are a little bit better than North India in terms of acceptance.
நன்றி சித்ரா. Daisy, back to you.
Sorry, I muted myself. Thanks, Dhrakanan. Yes, gender equality lies at the core of all human rights, dignity, and shared future. Yet these achievements cannot be taken for granted. Women rights and gender equality are needed more than ever. Progress on women's rights and gender equality driven by human rights activists such as Tandai Periyar in India and powerful feminist movements across the globe have profoundly transformed our society, make them fair, fairer and more resilient and peaceful place. Puratchikkavignar Bharathidasan Tamil Mandram would like to thank Thirumigu Rathika Sitsabaiesan and Thirumigu Chithra Jeyaram for their enlightening speech and who participated. At last, I would like to bring the theme chosen by UN Human Rights to celebrate International Women's Day 2025. Her rights, our future, right now. Thank you so much.